Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over Part A of the revising and editing section of the 2023 SHSAT Student Handbook. Just as a reminder, Part A questions are the standalone questions, right? They don't have unlike Part B, they don't have an entire passage that you go on and refer to for the rest of the questions, right? And I think the fact that they're standalone makes them a bit more tricky because you really need to know some specific rules about grammar to solve them, right? But hopefully in this video we'll go over that, right? So we're going to start off with question 1, which asks us to correct the revision error in sentence structure in the paragraph, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to read this, right? The land on Earth has not always been separated into 7 continents, comma. At one time, a massive supercontinent known as Pangaea covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface, right? So in reading the sentence, I've automatically noticed an issue, right? What I noticed here is that I have this comma in between these two full sentences, right? So this is a sentence before this, right? And after this is also a sentence, right? And why is this an error? It's because a comma, right? Comma cannot connect two sentences together, right? So whenever I see two complete sentences and a comma between them, I know that is wrong. That is what we call a run-on sentence, right? And that obviously isn't allowed. If this was a semicolon, it'd be okay. If this was a comma followed by and or another conjunction, it'd be okay. But since I have two complete sentences on either side connected by a comma, I know this is false, right? You may be asking me, oh, well, how do you know it's a sentence? Well, think about it, right? A cool way to just think about identifying a sentence is, can I tell this to my friend without any context, and will they know what I'm talking about? Will they look at me like I'm crazy, right? So let's just look at this side of the sentence, right? If I come up to my friend and I say, hey, did you know the land on Earth has not always been separated into 7 continents? Or if I just tell him, the land on Earth has not always been separated into 7 continents, that's a full sentence, right? He knows what I'm talking about. Our subject is the land on Earth, right? And our verb is being separated, right? Or the fact that it's not been separated. If I come up to him and I tell him that, he will know exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't need context from a previous sentence, right? And it gets the thought across, right? I know what's happening. I know how it's happening. I know what's happening, which is my subject. I know how it's happening, my verb. Now, if I look at the second part of the sentence, at one time, a massive supercontinent known as Pangaea covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface. That's another perfectly good sentence. If I come to my friend, I say, hey, at one time, a massive supercontinent, also called Pangaea, covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface. That's also a complete sentence, right? What I'm trying to get at here is that this is a run-on, right? Because there are two complete sentences here. So we have to correct this with obviously either a period or a semicolon or a conjunction, and choice A is the only one that fixes that because it puts a period here, right? If I look at choice B, right, I just keep on moving on. It says, I'm just going to start reading it from here. It says, massive supercontinent known as Pangaea covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface. Additionally, the supercontinent was surrounded by ocean waters, right? What this is telling us is I want to replace this period with a semicolon, right? And really, there's not an issue here, right? As a matter of fact, a period and a semicolon do the same job, right? They're the same thing. A semicolon can be used as a period can be used as a semicolon. So we're not really changing any error here, and we're not really changing anything at all. We're just replacing something with an identical version of itself, right? So that's wrong. Number C asks us to, or choice C asks us to put a period right here. So let's just go ahead and continue reading. Additionally, the supercontinent was surrounded by ocean waters called Panthalassa, comma, much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere, right? And what this choice wants us to do is it wants to replace this comma with a period, right? And let's just see why that's wrong. Whenever I have a period, I want to make sure, first off, before getting into anything, a period can only connect a sentence with a sentence. Sentence has to be before the period, sentence has to be after the period, right? So let's just see if there are 2 sentences before and after this period, right? So additionally, the supercontinent was surrounded by waters called Panthalassa, right? That is a complete sentence. I have a subject, I have a verb, right? My subject is the supercontinent, and it's surrounded, right? My verb surrounded by ocean waters. Okay, right? If I come up to my friend and said, "Hey, do you know the supercontinent was surrounded by ocean waters called Panthalassa?" He'd be like, "Okay, cool. The supercontinent is surrounded by ocean waters called Panthalassa. Cool, right?" Now, this part, the second part, is where we find an issue, right? And it reads, much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere, right? Is that a full sentence, right? Can I tell this to my friend? Can this stand alone? And will it have the same meaning? Will it convey meaning, right? So let's just read it out loud. I come up to my friend, I say, "Hey, much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere." Much of what were in Earth's southern hemisphere, right? This doesn't make sense as a standalone thing. The whole idea of a sentence is you can just take it, right? And you could have it on its own, and it should be somewhat understandable. By understandable, it should have a subject and a verb. There is no subject here, right? Much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere, right? I don't know what was in Earth's southern hemisphere. So obviously this is not a complete sentence, this is a fragment, because it's either missing a subject and a verb, right? It's missing a subject here, so it's going to be a fragment, and a period cannot connect a sentence and a fragment. A period can be between 2 full complete sentences, right? And the same issue goes with choice number D. Once again, if we replace this with a comma, we end up creating a run-on sentence, right? If we replace this period with a comma, there are 2 full sentences before and after the period, so it can only be a period or a semicolon. That's all. So moving on to number 2, it says, read the sentence. The Appalachian Trail is a really long trail that a lot of people do each year. And it asks us which revision of the sentence uses the most precise language, right? So when we're talking about precise languages, generally the trick on the SHSAT is to use numbers, right? Don't give me any, oh, it's this, it's that. No, give me a direct number, right? If I'm talking about cookies, I don't want to say that she baked a lot of cookies. I want to say that she baked exactly 12 cookies, right? Because that's precise. That's precision. If we look at the sentence here, I see some precision issues, right? I don't know what a really long trail is, and I don't know what a lot of people do each year, right? I don't know how many. A lot doesn't tell me how many specifically, and really long doesn't tell me how long specifically, right? So if I look at my choices, I can eliminate E and H, right? Because they don't use my number rule. Usually when it's most precise, we want to incorporate numbers. We want to incorporate metrics, right, that can convey how really how long this trail actually was. If I say lengthy, if I say extremely long, that's still the same thing as saying really long, because I don't know how long it actually is. Well, look at choices F and G. They tell me that it's exactly 2,200 miles. It's a 2,200 mile trail, right? So they fixed this problem, right? Now we just have to deal with this problem, right? That a lot of people do each year, and the answer to this is going to be choice G, right? Notice how they did include numbers in the second part, right? But the issue with choice F is that it says it's a 2,200 mile trail that more than 1 million people hike each year, right? This gives me an interval, right? Whereas choice G tells me straight up that 2 million people hike it each year. It's not telling me, oh yeah, more than 1 million people hike it each year, right? A lot. More than 1 million, right? That could be 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, 6 million, 10 million. It can keep on going until infinity, right? That doesn't tell me a lot. What does tell me something, what's a lot more precise, if I say, rather than saying, oh yeah, more than 10 cookies were baked, if I tell you that 10 exact cookies were baked, or that exactly 2 million people hike each year, right? That's a lot more clear, right? So avoid like verbal descriptions, right? Try to go for numbers, and avoid intervals. Try to go for set values. So moving on to number 3, it says, what is the best way to combine the sentences to clarify the relationship between the ideas, right? So whenever they ask us to combine sentences, right, they list it to us in chronological order of how it should happen in a sentence, right? So here we have 1, 2, 3, and these choices all represent how it should naturally come in this one mega sentence. Okay? So let's just read these choices, right? So we have to start off by saying that the International Space Station has been inhabited by crew members since 2000, okay? Next, we have to say that tourists will soon be allowed to pay for visits for the station, right? And choice 3 says, because the cost is 52 to 58 million round trip, few people will be able to take advantage of the opportunity to have a vacation in outer space, right? So it seems like 1 and 2 just go hand in hand, right? The space station has been inhabited since this long, right? And tourists will soon be able to pay for the space station, right? But sentence 3 adds a contradiction to sentence number 2, right? Sentence 3 adds a limitation, right, to sentence number 2. Sentence 3 is pretty much being like, hey, I know we just said that tourists will be allowed, but that doesn't mean that a lot of tourists will be allowed. That just means that a select few tourists will be around because it costs so much money, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is that logically 3 is contradicting 2, right? It's limiting 2, right? 2 just said, oh yeah, tourists can come. 3 is like, actually no. A small number of tourists can come because it's expensive. And choice B is going to be the best option, right? That encapsulates what I said, right? It starts off with choice 1. Actually, as a matter of fact, everyone starts off with choice number 1, right? It says the International Space Station has been inhabited by crew members since 2000. Okay, so that was number 1, and it's in the front. Okay, that's integrated perfectly fine. The International Space Station has been inhabited by crew members since 2000, and will soon allow tourists to pay for visits. Okay. What did I say, right? Choices 1 and 2 go hand in hand. It's okay. And that "and" is fine. Now choice 3 is, right? Now we're on to sentence number 3, or fragment number 3. It says, but because the cost is 52 to 58 million dollars round trip, few people will be able to take advantage of the opportunity to have a vacation in outer space. Is that not exactly what I said? But is the word you use when there's a contradiction. Choice 3 contradicts choice number 2. We're good, right? If we look at choice A, it says that the International Space Station has been inhabited by crew members since 2000, but tourists will soon be allowed to pay for visits to the space station, which costs 52 to 58 million dollars round trip. So few people will have the advantage of taking the opportunity, right? So this kind of is poorly structured if you think about it, right? The contradiction here, really, what we're trying to, what this sentence, or what this combination of sentences is trying to convey, is that the ISS, right, the space station, is going to allow people to come in, but it's not going to allow a lot of people to come in because of their cost, right? This doesn't really convey that in the clearest sense, right? It's really, the contradiction here lies in the but, right? But here it's acting as if 2 goes against 1, when in reality 3 goes against 2, right? So just the sentence structure in itself doesn't make sense, right? Here, the point we're trying to drive across is this final point, that few people will be able to have vacation in outer space, right? The main point of the sentence is, even though we're allowing tourists to go into outer space, few people will have the opportunity, right? This is saying more like few people will be able to go to the space station, but because of the cost, not many people will be able to go, right? And it's kind of a subtle difference, but really choice B does it a lot better, just because of how it places this but, right? It really emphasizes that it's the cost that's limiting the trip, right? It's really about the cost that is limiting the amount of tourists. With choice A, right, the "so" really does a poor job, right? Right, and because does a really good job at explaining why few people will be allowed on. Choices C and D, right? The International Space Station has been inhabited by crew since 2000, but tourists will soon be allowed to pay for visits to the space station. Though the cost is 52 to 58 million dollars round trip, so few people will be able to take advantage of the opportunity to have a vacation in outer space. This sentence doesn't make sense. Let's be honest, right? Let's be honest. But tourists will soon be allowed to pay for visits to the space station. Though the cost is 52 to 58 million round trip, So few people will be like, this doesn't make sense. Like these these transition words are just completely misplaced, right? Once again, we have this but between the first fragment and the second fragment. That doesn't make any sense, right? And though, what is though doing here, right? The point of this is to clearly convey that because of the cost, few people will be able to go into vacation, right? This doesn't do that because it uses though and not because, right? Same thing for choice D. Choice D is once again another pretty clunky way of getting the point across. It says the International Space Station has been inhabited by crew members since 2000, and tourists will soon be allowed to pay for visits to the space station because the cost is $50 to $58 round trip. What? Like, just think about this, right? Tourists will soon be allowed to pay for visits because the cost is $52 to $58 million round trip. That doesn't make any sense, right? The high price tag isn't the reason why tourists are being allowed to come, right? The price has absolutely nothing, no reason behind why the tourists are coming, right? So that's just illogical, and that leaves us with choice B as the right answer, right? As you read more sentences, as you practice what proper sentences, compound sentences look like, you will get a feel on how like ideas should flow from clause to clause. Really, if you eliminated choices C and D immediately, you're in the right place. And if you're trying to battle between A and B, I understand. It's a subtle difference between both of them, but as you practice more, you should be able to pick out B as the right answer, right? So number 4 says, which edit should be made to correct the sentence? And here we're dealing with commas, right? So since we're dealing with commas, I think it'd be a very good idea for us to just review what a comma can do, right? So the only thing a comma can really do is it can connect a fragment to a sentence, right? And you'd be maybe asking me, what is a fragment? Well, we were dealing with fragments all the way back in question number 1, right? Remember when we were talking about much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere, right? That's a fragment. It's a incomplete sentence, right? It's a sentence that's either missing the verb or missing the subject, and it's something that can't stand alone as a sentence, but it's something that makes sense when it's added to a sentence, right? So I'm just going to go back to this example, right? Because I'm going to use the SHSAT's own words to explain this, right? So if we look at the fragment right here, I'll go ahead and I'll erase some things, right? If I look at this fragment right here, right? It's saying that much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere. That's missing a subject, right? And that can't stand alone as its own sentence because it's missing a subject. It doesn't make sense. But when I combine this much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere with the supercontinent was surrounded by ocean waters called Panthalassa, much of which were in Earth's southern hemisphere. This combination suddenly makes sense, right? Because I know what that much of which were in the southern hemisphere were. I know that this massive ocean was mainly in the southern hemisphere, right? And the reason why this makes sense, the reason why I'm allowed to connect this fragment to this main sentence is because of this comma, okay? So the main thing a comma can do is it can connect a sentence with a fragment, right? And the same thing goes, it can connect a fragment to a sentence, right? So it can connect a sentence to an incomplete sentence, and it can connect an incomplete sentence to a sentence. Another thing a comma can do is it can separate an introduction, right? If we look at right here, it says additionally and in fact, right? You have commas right after them. That's more, I wouldn't really call that a fragment, but I guess you could say that it's a phrase that really can't stand alone as a sentence, so you just stick it on with a comma. That's another thing that commas can do, right? They could stick on introductions there. And that's pretty much it, right? So just know, and the biggest rule is that your comma cannot go between subject and verb. Right? The comma, so in essence, a comma can connect a sentence to a fragment, it can connect a fragment to a sentence, and it cannot go between the subject and a verb, right? So knowing that rule, knowing all those rules, choice E is going to be our correct answer, right? Because it connects a fragment to the main sentence. Now, I'm going to go through the rest of these choices, and I'm going to try to explain my thought process, right? If I insert a comma after agile, right, what does that do to the sentence, right? You can say that pretty much this comma doesn't affect the sentence at all, right? It just organizes the ideas better. It says in 1962, the agile, comma, athletic Wilt Chamberlain became the first and only professional basketball player in the United States to score 100 points in the first game, right? This is connecting this fragment, 1962, the agile, what, right? Wilt Chamberlain, right? And I guess I forgot to mention this, but commas can also be used in lists, obviously, and commas can be used to separate two adjectives, right? So I could just do lists, comma, lists, right? And adjectives, that's supposed to be an A, right? So those are the four uses that I can think of off the top of my head at 4:17 p.m. today. Right? There may be more uses that I'm not talking about, but these are the main uses. And for choice E, right, whenever you have two adjectives that are independent of one another, you want to use a comma to separate them, or else it doesn't really make sense, right? Agile, athletic. Aren't you already athletic if you are agile? Or are we using athletic in the terms of an athlete, right? If there's no comma there, that's kind of confusing. This turns into like a compound word. It's kind of weird. But if you tell me agile, athletic, Wilt Chamberlain, right? Now I know that he's agile and I know that he's athletic, right? So that's why comma between two adjectives, right, kind of serves as a list. It's almost like you're listing his adjectives, and because that comma is there, that's separating them. It makes it a lot more easier to understand just what you're trying to describe, or what the adjective even means, right? If we added a comma after first, right, what that would have accidentally done is it would have made it into a period. Why? Because remember, whenever you have a comma and a conjunction, right, and that's fanboys, for, and, nor, but, you know, all that, of, yet, so, if you have a comma and any one of these words, what it does is it creates a period. It creates like an imaginary period. You treat it as a period. And if I do add a period here, I'm just gonna draw a dot here, and I'm gonna erase this, because that's exactly what you're doing if you're adding a comma there. You're creating an issue in the sentence structure, right? You're separating these two. In 1962, the agile, athletic Wilt Chamberlain became the first. That doesn't make sense, right? As a sentence, that doesn't make sense. That's an incomplete sentence, right? So if this is an incomplete sentence, why am I adding a comma and treating it as a complete sentence? That creates another issue, right? And the thing with only, right, you don't need a comma and only, because it creates a splice, right? It goes against our number one rule, which says that you cannot place a comma between the subject and the verb, right? That doesn't make grammatical sense. And inserting a comma after states, right? If I insert a comma after states, it's almost like I'm treating to score 100 points as a fragment, right? I have my full sentence here, and I'm treating this as a fragment because I'm just sticking it onto my sentence, right? But really, that pause is unnecessary because this isn't a fragment. This is part of the full sentence, right? So I hope that made sense. We're moving on to number 5, and that's the end of part A. And it says, which revision corrects an error in sentence structure in the paragraph, okay? So it says that in 1967, Catherine Switzer signed up for the Boston Marathon using her first and middle initials instead of her first name. At that time, only men were permitted to officially register and receive a number for the legendary race. Automatically, right here, I see my issue, right? This is a run-on sentence, right? Here's our comma, right? And let's look before and after our comma. I just said that a comma cannot connect two sentences. Let's see if there's a sentence before and after. Before it says, in 1967, Catherine Switzer or Switzer signed up for a Boston Marathon using her first and middle initials instead of her full name. That is a full sentence, right? I can tell that to my friend. I could say, hey, you know, Catherine signed up for the Boston Marathon with only her first and last initials instead of her first name. That's a full sentence. And the thing after it, right? At the time, only men were permitted to, or rather, only men were permitted to officially register and receive number for the legendary race. That's also a sentence, right? That's a full thought. I can tell my friend that only men can register for that legendary race, and they'll be like, oh, okay, I guess only men can go, right? And you may be asking, oh, how did you know automatically that it's a run-on sentence? I look at my choices, right? There are 4 edits that I could make here, and they tell me what they're changing it to. And whenever I have a comma being changed to a period, I usually think of a run-on sentence, and I think of correcting a run-on sentence, right? And as a matter of fact, all of these choices were changing a comma to a period. So if you're changing a comma to a period, you're trying to look for a run-on sentence. I just got lucky, and my run-on sentence was in the first choice, right? All these other ones, the commas are actually correctly placed, and if you add a period, you create a fragment, right? You actually create an incomplete sentence on either side of the period, right? So that's choice number 5, or question number 5. That's the entire part A of the section of the revising edit. If you have any questions, please leave them let me know in the comments, right? Leave them down there. If you like what you saw and you want more SHSAT content, also let me know in the comments. If you like the video, just please leave a like, and any questions, please leave them in the comments. I hope you learned something. I know that 26 minutes to go over 5 questions is a bit outrageous, but I just wanted to make sure that each of you knew why I eliminated each choice, or why I made the decision I did.